They laughed when I said I led a cross-continental expansion. One of them actually said, "Too impressive to be true." Then their biggest client walked in, pointed at me, and said, "She's the reason we didn't go bankrupt." And just like that, everything changed. Hi, I'm Sierra. I was told I wasn't the right fit for 73 interviews until the truth punched through their biases. Have you ever been doubted just because you didn't come wrapped in the packaging they expected? Have you ever been talked down to until someone louder proved your worth? Drop a comment, because this story is for anyone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Now, let's rewind to the moment I walked into that boardroom and they tried to erase my entire career with a smile. "She doesn't have the pedigree for this role. Why are we even wasting time?" The words landed like a slap across my face, each syllable sharpened by the sterile chill of the conference room. I sat upright, my palms flat against the faux mahogany table, my spine rigid beneath the tailored blazer I'd worn too many times to too many dead-end interviews. This one with TGR Advisory felt no different. I glanced toward Meredith Dorn, the chief talent officer, her legs crossed, lips pursed, and pencil-thin brows arched with performative skepticism. Behind her, sunlight bounced off the glass walls, reflecting my own expression back at me, a composed surface barely concealing the fire beneath. "I've led multinational expansions across 5 countries. I began calmly, including Southeast Asia, where I oversaw a portfolio worth." Meredith raised a manicured hand. Yes. All very impressive on paper. But how exactly do we verify any of that? Your references are, let's say, fragmented. Fragmented? Try gutted. After the acquisition that dismantled Crest Innovations, half the leadership team scattered, and the other half signed NDAs so tight they couldn't confirm the sky was blue. Still, I met her gaze. "Results can be verified. I'd be happy to walk you through." Meredith leaned back, smirking. "Your resume reads more like fan fiction. That market expansion? Our analysts say the region was commercially stagnant during that period." I clenched my jaw. "That's because your analysts applied a Western model to a non-Western market. I used a consumer behavior overlay based on." She interrupted again, voice sweet with condescension. "Let's be honest. The only reason you were even considered for this interview is because of a connection in your background. Someone important, I'm guessing?" I glanced toward the glass wall again, catching sight of the framed Employee of the Year photo behind Meredith, herself, grinning beneath a headline of manufactured success. "I was asked here because I'm good," I said, voice steel-edged now. "Not because I'm connected." "Oh." Meredith arched an eyebrow. "Then explain the disaster that was the Helix consumer project. That market entry tanked within months." I took a breath, slow and deliberate. The Helix project was projected to fail. I reversed that trajectory in 8 weeks. "And then promptly disappeared from the industry?" Meredith sneered. "Sounds like a very creative rewrite of events." The room fell into uncomfortable silence, a collective retreat into awkward note-taking and flicking pens. Just as I opened my mouth again, the side door clicked open. Footsteps. Polished shoes on tile. And then, "Sierra?" I turned. Clark Rowan stood in the doorway, executive power practically radiating from his sharply tailored suit. His face lit up. "You're Sierra Mathis," he said, approaching. "The one who rescued our entire Asia-Pacific rollout when our consultants told us to walk away." He turned to the room. "Her insights doubled our revenue in Q2. She's not just qualified, she's transformational." The silence cracked. Someone dropped a pen. Clark faced Meredith directly. "If she's joining your team, TGR just secured another 3-year contract with my firm. If not, well, We'll revisit our options. Meredith's face drained of color. She began. Clark turned back to me, a glint in his eye. Sierra, join them. You'll be leading their strategy team, and I'll triple my investment. What do you say? All eyes swiveled to me. I looked at the empty coffee cup in front of me. Cold. Hollow. Just like every sacrifice I'd made, every doubt I'd swallowed. I lifted my eyes, met Meredith's frozen stare. I'll need time to think. Meredith's jaw clenched. She said nothing, but behind her, the intern by the printer shot me a quick nod of admiration. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. The moment Clark stepped into the room, the air changed. The soft hum of the overhead lights faded beneath a sudden, unnatural silence, as if the room itself had paused to recalibrate. Meredith's fingers, which had been drumming smugly against her notepad, froze mid-tap. Even the fluorescent lighting, sterile and cold, seemed to sharpen its contrast, casting Clark in a subtle spotlight that fell across the glass table. I caught the faintest glimmer of Meredith's Employee of the Year plaque on the far wall, the photo's forced smile now looking eerily hollow. I let my eyes linger just long enough before returning to Clark's unwavering presence. As I said, I'll need time to think. The finality of it echoed louder than any applause. Not even a cough broke the stillness. The weight of those 6 words suffocated any rebuttal Meredith might have rehearsed. She didn't even blink. From the side, the intern still by the printer lowered his phone discreetly, probably texting someone what just happened. I saw something like awe in his eyes. Maybe even hope. I stood slowly, letting my chair slide back with just enough scrape to break the spell. As I did, I reached for my empty coffee cup, lifting it for a moment, then placing it down gently, as if marking the end of a ritual. No one stopped me as I walked out. Not Meredith. Not the board. Not even the power games that used to paralyze me. Because in that moment, I wasn't here to be chosen. I was the one making the choice. They only believe in you when someone louder tells them to. Carmen's voice was half laugh, half wound as she flipped open her laptop at the cafe table. The morning sun cut clean across the wood grain, reflecting in streaks off the screen. Brooklyn bustled around us. Early meetings, dog walkers, strollers creaking on cobblestones. But in that booth, time bent inward. I sipped my espresso, bitter and cooling fast. They do, I replied quietly, until you become the voice they can't ignore. Carmen angled the laptop toward me. So here's what I've been building, she said. A consultancy that fuses behavioral data with cultural nuance. It's what you've done intuitively for years. Now we formalize it. We start small, agile, but we don't copy their playbook. We burn it. She grinned, and I saw it. The same fire I used to feel before every interview drained me dry. My chest tightened. I got used to being doubted, I admitted. They'd see my resume, hear my pitch, then find a polite way to say I didn't fit the mold. Crest was the worst. Remember the meeting? When Preston said, "We need a different kind of leadership energy?" Translation: we want men we can mold. Carmen's eyes narrowed. You were outperforming the entire strategy division. And still disposable, I said, forcing a smile. That's when I knew I'd never be more than qualified until proven convenient. My phone buzzed. Meredith Dorn, incoming call. Carmen caught the name and raised an eyebrow. Well, well. I slid to accept, tap speaker. Sierra. Meredith's voice came through, honeyed and tight. I wanted to follow up on yesterday's meeting. We were all impressed, truly. I may have come off more skeptical than necessary. That's just how I vet leaders. I gave no reply, just stared out the window at a cyclist weaving between cars. "We'd like to extend a formal offer," she continued, "with a revised compensation package. 400,000 base, plus signing bonus. Senior Director of Global Strategy." Carmen let out a low whistle. "I appreciate that," I said, calm as steel, "but I'm not accepting."
Pause. Static.
Excuse me? "You were never evaluating my fit, Meredith," I said evenly. "You were trying to prove I didn't belong." "That's not fair," she said quickly. "We had to be rigorous. Due diligence." "No," I interrupted. "You called my experience fan fiction." Meredith's breath hitched. "Sierra, I'm offering you a seat at the table." "I'm building a better table," I replied, and ended the call. Carmen leaned back, stunned. "You just turned down $400K on speaker." "I don't need to be hired to feel valuable," I said, my heart pounding in strange, electric peace. "I need to be free to rewrite the rules." We sat there in silence as the city moved past our window. She tilted her cup toward mine. "To Prism Strategies." I tapped it with mine. "To revenge, intelligently executed." After she left, I lingered. The old instinct clawed at me. Fear of financial instability, of being reckless. I pulled out the TGR business card Meredith had given me during the interview and stared at it. The embossed logo, the sterile font, the unspoken promise of stability. Then I crumpled it, threw it into the cafe's trash bin with precision. I opened my laptop, drafted a concise, unsentimental email. "Dear Meredith, thank you for your offer. After careful consideration, I must decline. I don't need to sit at the table. I'm building a better one. Sierra Mathis." As I hit send, I held my breath. The button clicked with a gentle tap, but in my mind it sounded like a gavel falling. The email flew off into the ether, carried by a whoosh that seemed to echo across the quiet cafe. Time stretched. The world around me slowed just a fraction. The hiss of the espresso machine elongated. The clink of porcelain seemed distant. I felt something loosen in my chest. Outside, a cab honked. A delivery bike sped past. Yet inside this sun-drenched cafe, I was frozen in a moment of silent declaration. From above, we must have looked like the calm before a cultural storm. Carmen and I seated in our booth, laptops open, plans unfolding, as if orchestrating a quiet revolution in the heart of the city. I looked back at my notebook one last time. Project Prism, rebuild from power. The words inked across the top. Below that, I drew a clean line under it. Then I glanced at the crumpled TGR business card in the trash bin, barely visible under a napkin. That, too, felt symbolic, buried beneath the disposable. And finally, as Carmen returned with 2 more coffees, she raised a brow and smirked. "Did we just throw a grenade?" "No," I said, smiling slowly. "We just built the first wall." At that very moment, another buzz. Text from Clark Rowan. "If you need workspace for Prism, I have a floor in Dumbo collecting dust. Build me something bolder than last year's magic." I stared at the message, heart thudding. Around me, espresso machines hissed, chairs scraped, but I felt like Carmen and I had just dropped a match in the center of the city. If they say the market isn't ready, it usually means they aren't. The words echoed in my head as I stood in the middle of our makeshift garage office in Dumbo, Brooklyn. The space smelled of dust, burnt coffee, and tenacity. Old whiteboards leaned against exposed brick walls, plastered with maps of consumer behavior clusters and color-coded arrows of projected growth. Wires snaked under Carmen's desk, where Talia hunched in her corner with a silent intensity that rivaled a chess grandmaster deep in endgame. We weren't glamorous, but we were precise. And hungry. Damon Reeves' email sat open on the screen. a mid-level innovation director at a consumer electronics firm. He'd attended one of my workshops years ago and remembered how I challenged traditional frameworks. Now, his team wanted a second opinion on a project their current consultants had dismissed as a no-go: Southeast Asia. "I'm not saying it's impossible," he'd written, "just that everyone keeps telling us it is." "Which is exactly why we'll prove it is," I murmured. Carmen rolled her chair toward me, tapping her tablet. "We break it down by regional buying behavior, not Western market assumptions." Talia's already pulled lifestyle segmentation from mobile app usage in Jakarta and Bangkok. Consumption patterns are contradicting all the legacy reports. Talia didn't look up. "I just mapped overlay projections against real-time cultural events. The results are ridiculous. Their consultants aren't just wrong, they're outdated." I exhaled, the thrill of the chase overtaking the fear of being underestimated. We had less than 10 days to deliver a pitch that would overturn a decade of industry consensus. On day 6, we walked into Damon's company headquarters. The conference room was glass-walled and sterile, the kind that made ideas feel small if you let them. I didn't. As Damon welcomed us, his consultant team sat opposite, stiff in expensive suits and sharper skepticism. Their lead strategist, Jules Whitmore, barely nodded as I began. "Traditional data modeling assumes the West defines success metrics," I said, clicking to our first slide. "But what if success looks different depending on where you stand?" I clicked again. A dynamic model spun on screen, flipping the assessment logic. Our slide showed how cultural buying triggers, like collectivist value incentives and region-specific trust signals, outperformed all previously projected KPIs. Jules interrupted, snorting. "So, your firm builds strategies based on festivals and superstitions?" Before I could respond, Talia projected a wall of code. Lines lit up and clustered into a live predictive heat map. The screen came alive like a war room. "Behavior isn't superstition," Talia said coolly. "It's math wrapped in context." Damon's eyes widened. Slide by slide, we dismantled the conventional model. Carmen pointed out flaws in risk scoring. I redefined market entry phases based on local partnerships instead of capital flow. Midway through my section, the door creaked open. A tall man in a navy suit stepped in, frowning. "Who authorized this presentation?" he demanded. I recognized him from my Crest days, Kenneth Ng, now VP of Strategic Expansion. His voice cut like ice. "I did," Damon answered before I could. "And I suggest you sit down." Kenneth's nostrils flared, but he obeyed. I finished the deck without flinching. When the last slide faded, silence hung thick in the room. 1 second.
2.
3. Then applause, scattered at first, then gaining force. Damon looked across the table. This is exactly what we've been trying to articulate." Kenneth stood slowly, jaw tight. "You're undermining every established benchmark we've used." "No," I replied calmly. "We're updating them." Jules pushed back his chair, scoffing. "You're challenging an entire industry." "And yet," I said, smiling, "you're here watching." When our slide showing the flipped market entry model appeared, Carmen tapped a key, and the graphic rotated 180 degrees on screen. The Prism logo reassembled itself mid-spin, drawing a gasp from one of the junior analysts in the back. A hush fell over the room, not of dismissal, but sharp recalibration. The tension cracked not with a question, but with applause. The first clap came tentatively from Damon, then another from the far corner. By the fourth clap, it became unanimous. Chairs shifted. Pens dropped. For 3 full seconds, even Kenneth sat frozen, his mouth parted just slightly, like he wasn't sure whether to argue or applaud. In the garage that night, we celebrated with cheap pizza and adrenaline. Talia reprojected her heat map onto the wall, the green data clusters glowing across exposed brick like a military campaign, our own tactical war room. She rewound and slowed it. "We broke their model," she said simply. Carmen grabbed a marker and crossed out the slogan we had scribbled a week earlier. "We analyze the numbers." She replaced it with block letters. "We don't just consult, we confront." Then underlined it. The email from Global Market Summit came as we were still riding the high. After reading it aloud, we all looked up at each other, still surrounded by cables, mismatched chairs, and echoey brick. I stepped outside, light drizzle misting the air. Cars rushed down Water Street, headlights bouncing off puddles. I looked up at the Manhattan skyline in the distance, shimmering beneath the fog, and whispered, "Let's go bigger." A thunder roll, low and far off, answered back. "This stage wasn't built for us, so we'll turn it into a spotlight." Carmen whispered the words as she tightened the mic on my blazer. Her fingers trembled only slightly, but her eyes held steady. I glanced at the rows of empty chairs ahead of me on Stage B, the side venue, at the Global Market Summit. The real crowd was still glued to the main stage, where the TGR CEO was due to speak in an hour. The corner of my mouth lifted. "Then let's make them leave their thrones." She gripped my hand once. "They can't silence a voice rooted in truth." As I stepped onto the platform, the lights above me clicked on, cold, sterile. The background hum of conversation barely registered. I took a breath and began. "Every model you've been taught to trust is lying to you." The first few heads in the crowd snapped up. I continued, voice unwavering. "Our firm, Prism Strategies, spent the last year comparing traditional market entry forecasts with actual regional behavior in underserved economies. The results weren't just revealing, they were indicting." Slide 1 appeared, a cultural heat map overlaid with failed projections. I clicked again. A chart showed a 41% gap in revenue between firms using Western-centric models and those adapting locally. The silence grew. At the edge of the room, a few people trickled in. Then more. I didn't pause. I let the numbers speak. I showed how metrics like consumer readiness and market sophistication were built from Eurocentric lenses that ignored local behavior. I dismantled the idea of market inaccessibility, one context-based variable at a time. Carmen and Talia worked behind the tech booth, switching slides in perfect sync. A new graphic appeared, our model tracking emotional incentives across Southeast Asian markets. The room had filled by then. Rows of listeners leaned forward. From the corner of my eye, I saw Meredith Dorn slip into the front row. Her eyes locked on mine. I didn't blink. I was halfway through breaking down legacy scorecard frameworks when it happened. "Question," came a voice from the middle of the room. I squinted. Clark Rowan. He stood tall, unshaken in a sea of seated executives. His presence turned heads. "This analysis," he said, "it shakes the foundation of how my advisory board has approached growth for over a decade. Tell me, are you absolutely confident in your projections?" I stepped forward, unwavering. Our forecasts outperform traditional models by 23% to 41% across 4 regions. We've tested them in real-world applications. Our clients didn't just survive, they outgrew expectations. The pause was surgical. Clark nodded once. "Then let me say this. I've shifted my entire strategic portfolio to Prism. Not because of belief, but because of results. She doesn't need your faith. She has the numbers." The air cracked. First whispers. Then a sharp intake of breath. Dozens turned from the main stage toward us. Some even stood and crossed the room. The sound tech dimmed all audio from the other hall by accident, or divine timing. For a second, It felt like our small room swallowed the summit. Camera flashes. Reporters stood up. 2 reps from international firms pushed forward, handing cards to Carmen. I saw Meredith glance at Denton Price, TGR's CEO, who stood at the entrance, arms crossed, unreadable. Her lip quivered. Clark stayed rooted, arms crossed. Around him, the crowd leaned closer. By the end of our session, I had over a dozen meeting requests queued. Talia scrolled through her screen, muttering, TGR included. Outside the ballroom, I stood under the atrium skylight, finally breathing. A junior analyst who'd taken furious notes came up, eyes bright. I want to work with you, she said. Before I could answer, Clark passed behind me. Meredith chased after him, heels clicking on marble. You blindsided us, she hissed. Why wouldn't you tell me you were backing her? Clark didn't slow. Because she's the future, he said. And you're just a gatekeeper for the past. The glass doors opened, flooding the lobby with sunlight. And for the first time in years, it was shining on us. As I stepped onto the stage, Carmen squeezed my hand one last time, whispering, They can't silence a voice built on truth. Her voice trembled slightly, but her grip didn't. For a second, I wasn't just Sierra Mathis. I was every woman who'd ever been talked over and still stood up to speak. When the audience started to shift toward our stage, the camera above the ballroom caught it, a slow, graceful wave of heads turning, people rising, drifting away from the main stage in ones, then clusters. It was almost balletic. The main lights on our side began to intensify, catching the shifting shadows of 100 professionals as they moved. When Clark stood, the sound cut. Not by accident. One of the techs in the back killed the audio feed from the other room. It was dead silent, except for Clark's voice echoing like a verdict. As he said, She doesn't need your faith. She has the numbers. The spotlight overhead adjusted automatically, angling directly on him. Meredith blinked in the harsh contrast. Slowly, her shoulders dropped, and her jaw tensed. As the session closed, Carmen leaned toward me, grinning. We just hijacked a summit. Then she looked down at the list of meeting requests Talia had been managing and choked on a laugh. TGR included. Just before we left the stage, a young analyst in the front row clutched her tablet, eyes wide, and whispered to her colleague, I want to work with them. Outside, under the bright glass atrium, I turned to the exit doors. The sun had cut through the morning haze. For the first time in my career, it didn't feel like I was chasing the light. It felt like I was carrying it. They want to buy what they once dismissed, on their knees. I whispered the words to myself as I stood in front of the mirror, straightening the collar of my blazer. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of TGR's 52nd floor boardroom, casting long shadows over the conference table. Just hours earlier, this place would have felt suffocating. Now it felt small. This time, I murmured, I run the room. The double doors opened. Carmen entered first, her expression unreadable, followed by Imani, our counsel, sharp and calm in charcoal gray. I walked behind them with deliberate slowness. Across the table sat Denton Price, CEO of TGR, and beside him, Meredith Dorn, spine straight, lips tight. Her presence alone screamed objection, but Denton gave a practiced smile. Thank you for coming, he said. We'd like to open with a formal acquisition offer. Full buyout of Prism Strategies. You would lead the integration, of course, under our Executive VP of Strategy, Meredith. Carmen didn't blink. Imani simply opened her folder. I leaned forward slightly. So, I said, you're offering to absorb what you once discredited, under the leadership of the person who called my experience unverifiable. Meredith's mouth tightened. It's about aligning strengths, Sierra. You've proven yours. I opened my laptop and turned it toward the room. This, I said, clicking, is how Prism performed over the last 18 months. Charts flashed across the screen. Growth projections shattered. Client satisfaction doubled. Retention unmatched. An animation showed Prism outpacing every traditional consultancy in 3 markets. The lighting in the room seemed to shift with each slide, colder, sharper, as if truth was rebalancing gravity. These are not theoretical, I said. They are results, and they weren't achieved under your system. They were achieved despite it. Denton's gaze narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. I closed the laptop slowly, then slid a thick contract across the table. This is our counteroffer, Carmen said, her voice low but clear. The folder landed with a hard catch. I continued, Prism will retain full operational autonomy. We will establish a new division, the Inclusive Talent Directorate, independent from existing HR processes. I will report directly to the board. Meredith bristled. You're asking to override our core talent structure. That's the foundation of our reputation. No, I said, meeting her eyes. I'm replacing the structure that once deemed me misaligned. The same structure that filtered out qualified people because they didn't fit your mold. She flared. You're rewriting our systems based on your grievance? I'm redefining them based on performance.
Mine.
And the people your system missed. Denton inhaled slowly, then exhaled. The board will need time, but the data speaks for itself. Meredith's fists clenched under the table. Her silence screamed resistance. We'll await your formal response, Imani added smoothly. You have 72 hours. The meeting ended without a handshake. Carmen collected our materials. I stood last, watching Denton stare silently out the glass wall at the skyline, his reflection blurring into the steel towers. We didn't look back. Before the meeting, I stood alone in the hallway mirror just outside the boardroom. My reflection was calm, shoulders square. I adjusted my collar once and whispered, This time, I run the room. The moment we entered, silence draped the space like velvet. TGR's conference room had always intimidated. Its vastness, the weight of its glass walls, the view over Manhattan that once reminded me of where I didn't belong. But now, the skyline looked like a grid I was meant to redraw. When Carmen laid the counteroffer on the table, the folder landed with a distinct catch, a punctuation mark. Meredith flinched, almost imperceptibly. During my presentation, as I unveiled each slide, the natural light seemed to shift tone, cold, sharp. Shadows lengthened across Meredith's face. One moment, she looked poised. The next, her eye twitched. The camera operator behind us, likely corporate PR, zoomed closer. Caught in 4K, I thought. Imani's voice rang out. We'll await your written response within 72 hours. The deliberate emphasis on written felt like the final brick laid in a power reversal. We walked out slowly. I was the last to leave. As I stepped out the door, I glanced back. Denton was still seated, hands steepled beneath his chin, staring through the window. His reflection bled into the skyline behind him, silent, thoughtful, small. 3 days later, back at Prism's office, I was scanning financial models when the chime sounded.
Ding.
I opened the email. It was from Denton Price. We accept all terms. Meredith Dorn will oversee implementation, under your directive. The office was quiet. Carmen looked up from across the room, her brow raised. I didn't speak. Just let a slow, cold smile curl across my face. Checkmate. You can't argue with results, especially when they expose your blind spots. The words echoed in my mind as I stepped onto the stage at TGR's grand auditorium. 100 faces stared up at me, skeptical, expectant, some faintly amused. Senior executives occupied the front row, their badges glinting beneath white-hot lights. Meredith sat among them, her expression frozen, arms crossed. Behind me, the giant screen displayed the first slide of my presentation, bold white text on black background. Excellence doesn't always wear a familiar face. I let the silence hold for breath before I continued. For too long, we've equated competence with credentials.
Professionalism with pedigree.
But what if our filters have been wrong?
Click.
A new chart appeared, two bar graphs side by side. On the left, performance metrics from teams hired through TGR's traditional process. On the right, those recruited through Prism's inclusive talent framework. The difference was stark. Revenue, retention, innovation metrics. Every category tilted in favor of the overlooked. Murmurs rippled through the room. These aren't anomalies, I said. These are patterns. If we refuse to evolve, we don't just slow progress. We actively repel the very minds capable of leading our future. A hush dropped over the crowd. Another slide. Anonymized stories of candidates once rejected, now thriving as team leads, strategists, client liaisons. One name caught attention. Teresa Marlowe. The woman Meredith had rejected twice. A voice from the board's section broke the silence. Why didn't we hire these people in the first place? All eyes turned to Meredith. She sat rigid, her jaw clenched. But no answer came. The weight of silence said enough. After the session ended, applause rang out, slow at first, then rising. Some clapped out of relief, others in genuine acknowledgement. Carmen and Talia stood at the back, arms crossed, nodding slightly. I descended the steps from the stage. A group of younger analysts stood and reached out, shaking my hand one after another. "You're why I stayed," one whispered. "You made space." The next 3 months rewrote TGR's history. Our client satisfaction soared. Internal reports showed a 28% rise in productivity and 35% drop in attrition across departments using the new hiring model. I received an invitation to join the board of directors. Full authority over the newly renamed Talent Equity Division. And then, one rainy Thursday evening, Meredith knocked on my door. She stepped in, soaked but composed. Her voice was lower than usual.
"I was wrong," she said, "about you."
And about what matters. I let her speak. I built a system that rewarded sameness. I told myself it protected standards. But I was protecting fear. Fear of being proven outdated. I nodded slowly. The biggest mistake isn't judging someone wrong. It's doubling down when the truth proves you were wrong. Meredith's eyes glistened. "I've requested reassignment to the APAC division." She turned to leave, then paused and placed a white envelope on my desk. "For what it's worth," she said, "the system needs rewriting." And I had to learn that from the woman I dismissed. That night, I opened the envelope. A single sheet. "You were right. The system is flawed. And your vision forced me to see it. Led well. M." As the applause echoed through the auditorium, I stood motionless for a moment. It wasn't the volume that struck me, it was who was clapping. Some of the same directors who had once dismissed me without a second glance were now standing, reluctantly, their expressions unreadable. The lights dimmed slightly as the final slide zoomed in, side-by-side metrics of performance and satisfaction, animated arrows clearly pointing upward for the Prism cohort. Each bar pulsed faintly, color-coded in blues and golds. The contrast was undeniable. Soft instrumental music swelled in the background, less celebratory, more restorative. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was correction. The sound designer had chosen perfectly. From the corner of my eye, I saw a familiar face among the new hires. Teresa Marlowe, once filtered out of TGR's system, now stepped forward beside a group of directors. She was introduced as the new regional team lead for our upcoming European expansion. The crowd murmured in recognition. As I stepped off the stage, a young analyst I hadn't met before stood and extended his hand. "I never thought I'd belong here," he said. "But then I saw what you built." His grip was steady. His voice wasn't. "Thank you." Behind the crowd, Carmen and Talia stood shoulder to shoulder at the far end of the hall. Neither said a word, but as I passed, Carmen gave me a single nod. Talia smiled, not wide, but deep. When Meredith left my office that night, the envelope still on my desk, I watched her through the glass. She moved with less rigidity than usual. Outside, the rain had lightened, the streets glowing with reflections of light. Change doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes, it walks out the door quietly so that something better can finally step in. I no longer walk into rooms hoping to be seen. I walk in knowing I belong. After the noise, the dismissals, and the battles, there is now clarity, control, and quiet confidence. Dignity was never something I had to earn. It was something others failed to recognize until the proof spoke louder than my pedigree. What this journey taught me is simple. Power built on exclusion crumbles when faced with results born from truth. If you've ever been overlooked not because you lack skill, but because you didn't look the part, know this. The system isn't sacred, and it can be rewritten. Have you ever had to fight to be believed? Or proven your worth in a world that only listens when someone louder speaks for you? Share your story in the comments, because your voice might be the reason someone else finally finds theirs. And if this hit close to home, wait until you hear what happened when another underestimated woman rewrote the hiring rules of an entire industry. Next week's story is one you won't forget.